Well, hello everyone. Welcome to YouTube Coursera Masterclass, or YouTube Masterclass, because all Masterclasses are a YouTube thing at this point that I'm doing. That's a Coursera class. You get credit for college, and wouldn't you know, USC, Calarts, and Harvard have all volunteered to allow me with this original show that it was pirated originally, and then all this people at the schools wanted it for their own, and then it got placed in the three that I'm most qualified to teach, and some of the hardest to teach for. I'm not saying I'm like a USC professor in terms of the big movie star type USC movie professor. I'm more of like the critical theorist, and that's not to say that I'm not dodgy about my own aesthetic, but it's like that in the critical aesthetic, we are judged less for our, initial fame and fortune, which at USC can be all you can have to even be a teacher at that point at their school. So I am a professor at USC, that I'm adjunct to Calarts. And this is not a problem because I needed to teach class. I needed to get credits, and Harvard and Calarts and USC are very difficult places to get to teach for. That Harvard jumped on probably had to do with it working at the other two schools that I got to teach a three-way YouTube masterclass in my first one out. Pretty good. Pretty good. But it went well. We had a good semester this semester with D.W.Griffith. I'm going to be showing masterclasses more about myself for the biographical information that you're going to need to know. That's divided into 30 to an hour long. Most of them will be an hour long speech in between the time that we have until next semester, which is spring semester, although it'll still be winter when spring semester starts because we're starting as early as we can, like we did last year on December 27th. And there will be a break before summer school, but someone will by then inform me what to fill my time with in these like interchange master classes, which YouTube has okayed as long as it fits part of the class and as long as it pertains to your bio in these next six. And then we'll deal with the time off we have, because one thing teaching school, it has time off. In the summer usually is all, but when you taught, we started so early in the summer that we're like ending just at the beginning of winter, and it's like now we've got to wait all this time for more master classes. But that's for me, and I know that's important for me to keep pushing them out with. So what I'm going to do is do what my producer said and put in 6 bios that are all, tell the whole story and tell why I'm here and give my credentials. I could sit here today and while away the hour, not talk about D.W. Griffith through this class as an auteur style, 375 grad or undergrad can take. But, the funny thing is with all that, I bet you're not ready for this. It's finals week. No, it's just the final being delivered. You can take as long as you want until before December 27th to turn it in. The final is pretty easy. It's the question is that you have to write an essay on, and I prefer, since we haven't had much homework, and other than getting through each lecture, which can be overbearing in the silent era especially. I apologize that the silent era is only as entertaining as you see it in your own mind, and some of you see it as very archaic and primitive, and actually there were things more primitive than that were even beautiful and to look at aesthetically, and that it's aesthetic cinema. We have to realize these silent films are beautiful to look at. Even Birth of a Nation is beautiful to look at. It's beatific. It's like they screened it just for the most beautiful photo you can ever see, and that's what the cinematographers goes for, is the photo that everyone most wants to see, arranged towards that plotted script, etc. Now, the final kind of goes along the whole measure of divisive action. I don't really like divisive action, but here's something you should try out. Divisive action is when you write things as they're coming true. A little before, no, you write things and right after they come true. And that's either because someone's like monitoring your book or something, 1984 style. I don't know, that's a conspiracy theory, but like they're monitoring what you're writing, even in your notes. Which could explain why my notes are so foggy to read, because I have such bad handwriting, so they can't read them, so they're like, oh, we'll just let them go through with it. No, that's not it. The point is that, like, it leads us to the ultimate question that I've heard from my friend Matt Crow, who's like a professor, and he's a great guy. He had once given me this thing about this diatribe about he doesn't think that natural born killers really affect society. Well, it affects film going society. Like, we all love that film. Does it really change or cause something to happen afterwards? So the question here is does life create art, or does art create life? And in the case of, we'll get back to natural born killers in a minute, but in the case of Birth of a Nation specifically, did life create art, or did art create life? Well, we know life created art because the very story of the Civil War had already existed at that form that was the most caught up one to 1915. So the Civil War would have had to have happened before to be recreated in art. And that it's recreated in art, it's done in a spectacular way that only the history books to that time had really worded, due to the racist nature of history books, and especially in the South. They had different books in the South than the North, I apparently seen, because there are some books that talk about the end of slavery that you probably wouldn't find in the South, you know. And I'm not just being funny, I'm saying, like, life create art? Well, his dad was a captain in the Southern Civil War, you know, and that's why all of cinema bows before Griffith's choice of the South for winning, because then all of a sudden it's these, like, nasty, like, angry, like, Klansmen that we get in today's movies are thinking, but it's actually these, like, guys that are in, like, these cloaks riding to go avenge all to the South. And we know that the Klan existed before Birth of a Nation. Like, the Birth of a Nation shows the creation of the Klan during the Civil War. May not even be accurate. Just the Klan may have come even before that, but that's usually the date the Klan history would say, yeah, we claim history when Birth of a Nation shows us during the war after the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. I'm thinking, if you did some research, and I've done a little research on this a long time ago, and I feel that Klansmen were around before South fell into total incoherent violence. I think that the Klan was risen before the Civil War was over, and that they had to reshape the South was no surprise, because they were the only soldiers left, because they were most of the Southern soldiers anyway. And this is untold history. I don't know if this is exactly accurate, but I really don't think that to get revenge on the Civil War, like Griffith was trying to say, was really how the Klan came about. I think they came about as soon as the issue of slavery was ever an issue, and they had to take that into law and order in the South. And so they come out looking like these total Nazi fascist machine types that are like Supermen, you know. And then you're like, oh yeah, well, I don't mind this movie anymore because I've heard of that, you know, like Ubermensch theory, and they can all be Ubermensches, and then you have to remind them, well, welcome to the real world, because nowadays most of us are like, don't think something's, even in places where that could happen, think, well, we don't want that to happen, because if the Klan has to come out of hiding, then something really bad must have happened. You know, it must have, something really bad must have gone down. And for the South to be all blown to pieces, that was one reason they would come out. And so I don't really know when that started on the timeline, but does life create art? Also, slavery. Slavery was not invented just so D.W.Griffith could make a movie. And was he commenting on being a slave driver? No, maybe in Intolerance a little bit, but not in Birth of a Nation. He wasn't looking at himself as a character, although he was kind of associating himself or his father with the Camerons. And then the Stonemans were from the North, right? So the Stonemans were like the guys leading the war, and they even had problems. It's weird, because in the North side of the story on the Birth of a Nation, there's this one guy from the South who lives in the North and tries to infiltrate Congress, and the worst scene of the movie comes out of that, and I'm not going to say what happens. But it's so degrading that you're just like, yeah, they were really going for the degrading. You start to think, now I don't feel so good about like avenging justice, because this is movie is falling apart. And this is this movie I really believed in until now. And now it's like, whoa, it showed me that. Now I don't want to see it. And it's like these congressmen acting all funky just because, they put the black men in congressmen. And I don't get any of that stuff because that was like that Jim Crow politics where everything was like back in the day was about segregation and they made it about that. And I'm not going to make this about anything that's happening today. I could say that like neo-Nazis and skinheads could use all this movie to see how to like territorialize and, high grade a neighborhood, but that'd be like anarchy, dude. No, don't teach that. Or you could say this is how we could escape this kind of a society is by playing this to terms as to how they'd reenact it if this was a reenactment given out. So now we have the very lanes of where they're going to be if we're their prospective enemy in another equality of man. Now, one thing I want to make very clear that Griffith kind of does point out with the creation of the Klan, and one thing that I'll have to make very clear is that like the Klan from the South was from the Klan, but the North really came to attack all those guys because some of these Klansmen that owned plantations, and the plantation owners would have slaves, and then the plantation owners would hurt their slave like with a whip, or like it's in 12 Years a Slave where they'll have sexual animosity towards some innocent slave. I mean, of course slaves are innocent, but that they spent so much money on the slaves, I gotta hand it to them. They must have had a lot of prosperity for those slaves to conquer because they did spend a lot on importing them. It was so hard to do that the money that went into it was the whole trade behind it. And I'm not saying it's good because it doesn't usually lead anywhere, and it usually always ends in revolts. That the North heard that there were confrontations between plantation owners and their slaves that were not so good for the slave side. They wanted to go into it. That was it. They couldn't understand, and they also had to bankrupt the South, because if they didn't bankrupt the South, they would have lost the war. So they had to think of, well, we're going to go to war to them, and right away they're like, let's bankrupt them. So they got their cash crop and they got their slaves out of there. So for Griffith's intertitles, not to explain all what I just told you, those are actually intertitles and scenes that would have gotten them off the hook in a little bit of respect towards the fact that the slave trade had been going on way before and way after. So here's the problem, though. Does life create art? Well, we just found out, yes, the Civil War did cause Birth of a Nation to happen. Now, if you're going to explain that in a couple of pages, that'd be great. A couple of essays. But or does art create life? Well, yes, it does. We finally found out, yes, it does. Because you can't say that every image that's ever been on screen has ever been mirror imaged off screen. But at all the times a copycat crime has ever arisen, and probably why the Klan is usually shown as bad in films to come and in films before, and only in Birth of a Nation as a good thing is the Klan ever shown. Maybe some D.W.Griffith episodes, which I don't think he's related to D.W.Griffith. D.W.Griffith went the way of the commie, and they would have had a gun shootout if that was the case, But does life create art? Yes. Does, and art creates life. And in The Birth of a Nation, you can explain that because right after they released that movie, tons of Klansmen, appeared on the streets of New York, on the streets all over the world. Everywhere there was a Birth of a Nation playing, they had this big publicity act to bring the Klansmen underground, above ground in 1915. This wasn't just in the 30s when they tried to bring it back and were bringing the Klan in, and it was kind of Griffith bringing the Klan in, only he'd been asked and probably been politicized to have to. But that doesn't excuse him, because even though he's got black friends and he's going along with this thing that's forbidden and against the law, and he kind of wants to see the Klan get big, and then all of a sudden, the second time, the film goes downhill, and the Klan kind of disperse, but they still kind of go wild, and they're supposedly always, when they come up above ground, there's some kind of lynching going on. And I can't judge the judgment of these lynchings about who did what to who. I mean, if it was a kid getting hurt, of course I'm going to send some crazy vigilante dude to stop him. It's like, well, if you're the only one that'll stop those kids from being killed, like, by and part, like, I'm not, but I would feel a little, misunderstood if I was trying to say that in the neo-Nazis, and then I was like, but it was this person or that person, not just that we have to go hurt someone, and I think That's where I would have to exit the group, is when it's not someone that I'm getting revenge on for breaking my Nintendo 64 back in the 3rd grade, okay? I'm going to call the clan on them. Chances are it was the clan that broke my Nintendo game system, right? No, I'm kidding about that. But the point is that, like, well, you know, if something really bad went down, like, with a kid, I could see how in some cases the clan would be like, and I'm going to sound like really horrific here, but would be okay, because you're like, dude, I just saw some shiznit go down that only the clan could handle. You know, yeah. I mean, it's a real world. You know, I'm not saying that like we have to rule out the D.W.Griffith method, though we do, because his is just like burst. They're all out. They're all killing everybody that's trying to attack anyone in the South, and this is okay because we don't want the South to die off. Because the last thing we need is the clan attacking the South too, or them thinking they're coming after them when they spent $1 million per even slave to get them over there. And I don't know, and at that time it's like $1 billion industry today if we had it still, and I'm glad we don't, but there is some forms of slavery, right? We talked about that. Like, there's people that work in like places, textile industries, that are really hard to do, and you could get injured, and they like to work because it's all the work they can get. And sometimes they stuff these places full of people. And I don't know much about it. I don't want to get all twisted and try to accuse. But somewhere out there on the black market, there is probably slavery. I'm not saying what it is. What is that one? It's like, there's this such a thing as trafficking, you know. And I don't really know what that means. I never looked into it. I'm not like a lawyer. I can't say what trafficking really means, but it seems offensive. Like, it seems really offensive, whatever it is. And I'm just saying, these things are not usually portrayed in a beautiful way, that are underground. They should be condemned. If there's some power that can condemn them without using too much power, then do it, like in a bureaucracy setting. But don't come telling me that those two things burst at the seams and it causes some kind of riot revolution in a big city. And then you're like, well, that Klansman can't fight that battle because he's got racial alterings. It's like the whole thing is chaos anyway, you know. And I'm not going to sit here and say who deserves to live and who deserves to die and how we live and how we die, because I don't know. It seems like you could understand what the Klansmen are saying. Well, we spent $1 million on this. We're totally bankrupt. We want our slaves back. Let's go see how far we can get. Nope. Now we just want everybody dead. And usually it was the slaves that survived in chance that they'd get slavery back, so they could put them back to work. But that was kind of sad because it led to segregation. And this is all after The Birth of a Nation comes out, because 1930s, Great Depression, segregation is now really hitting in. And from the 1920s, it was the jazz age. You could kind of get these new black artists who were in the jazz era could come along, and, you know, they could even come earlier in 1918 with Griffith and fight in World War I. And that was when he realized, you know, the Birth of a Nation thing doesn't make sense, even though he tried to bring it back when the Klan were rising again. So it seems like this is divisive action almost, but we can't encourage that kind of such an easy excuse, though. But divisive action here. He writes about some kid getting hurt. And that doesn't happen in reality. But then he finds something in the Civil War where it happens, that the Klan would go vengeance against those kind of cases, which means it must have happened. I mean, if they're sitting there going, well, those kind of cases aren't provable, and I'm like, well, everything he put in the movie happened at some point in reality, but the way he intertitled it all, you can't say happened, because they staged certain events so close to how they really happened that it's hard to believe that anyone would really try to correct and say, well, unless they're dealing with history and how it's organized and how history is organized. By the time the Santa Fe Trail thing and the Buster Keaton thing and the Bojangles thing and everything from the South being totally hoisted up as the way that the light came out of the tunnel all the way to Cabin in the Sky and Hallelujah. These are beautiful films, most of them. It's like all of a sudden in the 1940s with Cabin in the Sky and Hallelujah, you're getting this sense that maybe there really is some kind of a Harlem Renaissance that's showing through even in white eyes. And the Harlem Renaissance is where everything becomes even more segregated, because now they have the music and love the music of the African Americans. but still aren't allowed to go to school with them until those school kids say they're not going in their school unless their black friends can come too. And then Martin Luther King Jr. steps in and the whole thing. And then Oliver Stone is born. The end. Right? So, no, because he is what? How old is Oliver Stone? Like 23, 24? I don't know. He doesn't know anything for saying that. But anyway, so the point is that, like, you have this question being kind of difficult that I'm throwing on you, but it's not too hard. So again, in other words, to this part of the class, we're asking you the final: does D.W. Griffith's life create D.W. Griffith's art? And does D.W. Griffith's art create D.W. Griffith's life? Well, that's a more personal one. Did we ever say he was a Klansman? Not necessarily. They're too secretive to let you know. But I'll let you know when I know, and then I'll never know, even if I was or not, which I'm not. Or am I? You know, and I'm not, because on the one hand, I have to support this kind of this reverency to this group, but I don't prefer the racist, anti-Semitic way. And I don't prefer the authoritarian fascist way either. So you can't really put me in with these guys that have to, like, kick the crap out of somebody to be in the club. I could never be in the club for that reason, because I'd get the crap kicked out of me. But I could, like, cheer from the side or something, whoever I was fighting for, you know. And I don't really want to get rid of black culture, because I like the exploitation. I like hip hop. I like the black music, other black music like jazz. Yeah, we're not gonna have much fun getting rid of this society. And I know that the history passages are at different times, but integration really we'll see starting to come in the '60s. And it was not. And here's the answer to the question: no, it wasn't the Birth of a Nation that created the Klan. And yes, Birth of a Nation stirred up the Klan quite a bit, but no, it did not alter the way the Klan would have been handled in the final outlook of the civil rights, where most of them had gone back undercover and said, this is not our era. They don't need they need a militia for them, not for us. And like, they're like, you know, we remember that as kids, how the whole atmosphere of secret societies, and it was buried more under these like secrets, like the Illuminati was so buried under like these secret ideals and this idealism that we could still create a utopia through money, and you know, and all these things would come about if we just used our imagination. They'd appear, and we can just like do all these things in the future that are really cool. And I don't think Griffith was really powerful enough, even though the movie is a slam banger. I don't really think that he was popular enough, I mean, to really spread the message of Go Klan Go. His movie was, but he had some others that were like, this is a Pride to tuck in, and we're not liking the Klan much right now. And a director that switches sides between movies shows that he cares more about making the movie than he does really the plot making sense politically. And Griffith was like that, because he's not being lazy when it comes to the plot politically. It just shows that he's the first filmmaker, so he's got to make every kind of film there is, so everybody gets a sense of what kind of films they can make. And he knows he's leading this like ream of directors at cinema clubs constantly as to how to make more films in the teens and on to the 20s even. And then it was really him not getting the jazz singer may not have been the reason that he fell out of cinema, but he fell out of cinema right around that time, didn't he? Because he had done Lady of the Pavement seems like a Charlie Chaplin film, and I do know that Griffith would help with Chaplin films and help with Fairbanks films, like The Thief of Baghdad, with Roald Walsh being a total servant to D.W. Griffith, and all these directors like John Ford and Joseph von Sternberg and Erich von Stroheim, who got the von, you know, from the D.W. They got it from, and the W stands for work. I mean, we heard that already. It sounds like an alien from like a Scientology book. The evil work was coming to impress them, you know. That wouldn't be too surprising, considering D.W. Griffith's name was really run through the muck after he went to jail after The Struggle in Abraham Lincoln, those two movies he made in the sound era. You know, when he went to jail, it was at least until World War II that he got back out. So now he's already been there for a few years. He gets out for World War II, still fights for America. I guess if you were previously a soldier and he knew some things other soldiers didn't from being in World War I, and that he fought it with his same pilot, and they were war heroes again, twice in a row. And what happens to a war hero in the 1950s after they get back to America? Back to jail, and now he's got a reason. He's saying, not only was I commie then, I'm commie now, I'm coming out with it, you better. And he didn't say, you better arrest all the other commies so I have friends in here. Because that wouldn't be like, that would totally break down the service that they'd have towards each other, being friends under the same political banner. They wouldn't want to turn each other in, right? You would think. And even the hysteria it created wouldn't get you to turn in a friend. But when it came to communism, if you turn one in, it makes you look like you're not doing it. I didn't really get that part of it. And I'm not trying to say actors were trying to get out of it by saying someone else did it, because I don't really know how that worked. But if there were anybody in the blacklist would have known, if Griffith's already been blacklisted like 3 years before this whole House on American Activities happened, doesn't it look a little weird that he's the only one in jail? And, oh, nope, they're saying we have to go to jail too. I mean, it's like all of a sudden you're getting correspondence that your Writers Guild guys are going to be taken to jail because they write about communism. They came so far with that. They still don't really ask you to write with communism because now, again, like Russia's all making mistakes, and all the mistakes it's making are making us jeer away from Russia, and like art forms even, which is impossible for me to do, but I could jeer at Russia all day long. I could call them idiots all day long, but their artwork to me means a lot. And I'm not going to say the artists that made them were idiots, and I don't say that about any society, no matter which way it's gone. Even my enemy society can make a good artwork. There, I said it. There's throw it in the face of all you critics. An enemy society, which most cases they aren't, but they could create a film really good, and it may not be as good as an American film, but it's there's some good films from just about every country. Not every country. You could go through it, but I may not agree with something that I see in a film racially, but let's just say if you were asking me about the Nazis and what they are today, in terms of like these Klansmen, the Nazis today would be like the Das Boot kinds, or does not really as political, but you're still standing up for Germany, or usually that word means standing up for Germany. Neo-Nazi more like means the white supremacists, like we want only white people to exist. We only can exist if white people can exist. Well, I know they have all those groups. I'm not trying to pinpoint them out or make them illegal or make them legal or anything, because we haven't gotten to what the African American community can do in the Harlem Renaissance, and what they can show us already happened with how they economized entertainment in the silent era, even with the Jazz Age, all the way up to the jazz singer, which he's in blackface, but you could see this total modulum of like black people taking these like artistic jobs and playing their trumpet and just finally catching some release in the society that's so been blockaded with the same kind of racism that's from Birth of the Nation that I'm arguing would have been there with or without this movie. But the movie was there, and it was encouraging it, and to encourage something we don't like today because we don't want to disarm the African Americans is true. That I have that same theory about the master race, that if everyone thinks they're the master race, they can go on being the thought of master race. By me, it's a perspective. It's a relativity, whether I'm the master race or not, but I might be. And if I was, like, that doesn't mean I have any privilege over anyone else. It just means, like, I somehow have the genome, and, like, now scientists have to investigate me. No, I don't know what it all means. Like, can anyone tell me what critical history all means? Is it a big conspiracy play, or is it that you just play on conspiracies like the Hollywood Babylon way, which are true, but they're not, but they're true? Like we'll see in Hollywood, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood next semester, which I never got to at the beginning of this, that in next semester, you got to sign up for my course, or not even sign up, just show up when I start doing these videos. You can sign up and get subscription to the site, but the thing is we're taking it out in the middle of nowhere into a place that it's never really been but has, and we're doing a class on the films of Quentin Tarantino, and so far he hasn't told me not to. That I discussed it with someone who had discussed it with him. I'm not so sure, but we got the school's permission to do it, so that was the main reason we're doing it. I wouldn't waste my one phone call in jail with him over being whether or not I could do a class on him, because he might be thinking both sides and then need to make a longer decision. The truth is we kind of just are doing it because we're teaching academics here. You saw with this Griffith class, it's not easy. Just it's a fun subject, right? Everybody loves the racial conflict with the Klan, and were they wrong for showing them, and did they already exist, and are they coming later, and can a movie cause them to be, can a movie like Fight Club cause neo-Nazis to rage harder? I don't know. I'm not here to judge that. And if they can, I know these directors nowadays like to be rock stars anyway. So if David Fincher did that with Fight Club, he's probably like, I liked it that there's neo-Nazis in this. I like it, We'll have him attack them, and then he'll attack back with his big lunging arm, and it'll just freeze the frame, And I don't know, I could just see him like, he's an eloquent guy, and he always speaks eloquently, and I was just listening to some of his advice on artworking, and how artworking can be just this one celebration of like life in general, or it can be like this very match log basis of what you've all filmed. And when you're making like a murder mystery, there's always some footage one of the people on the movie doesn't want to look at. But the minds of most movie makers are on it. They'll look at everything that they're being shown so they can see what the final product is going to look like once it's shown, from the relativity of what that production needs to be. And I think there were a lot of factors that might have gone into what made Birth of the Nation work. And why I keep talking about it is this is our last class. This is the last time. It won't be the last time you hear about it. We'll have other classes where we'll see that Birth of the Nation influenced that film, Gone with the Wind. We'll talk about Gone with the Wind again. It's not the last time we're talking about Birth of the Nation. It's just putting to bed the idea that we can center a class around a director that's known for his great film, his first really long 3-hour movie that he really wanted everybody to see, and that he can make these movements happen, glide along, and then match on action, and it's this big puzzle of putting this piece together without anybody noticing there's any editing, because it's just flowing so well towards the end, towards the center of the confusion of the Civil War, to the center of the confusion, and everything else is straight and ordinary. The center of confusion becoming very blinding, very abstract, and very much all of a sudden now you have the devastation of the Klan upon the South. And really, it's during the Reconstruction. Now, this might be a true point in history you need to look at, because the Reconstruction did actually come when there were still Klansmen. Now, that the Klansmen weren't in effect at that time because the blacks in the North had told them, no more treating black people bad. You can still be racist, but you can't treat black people bad, And that's what they really need to say to a lot of these guys that don't really need reformed, is if they're innocent, they must be left alone, is what I'd like to tell them. But if anybody goes haywire and does something wrong, I think everybody of skin should be held accountable, depending on what the wrong is. And if that wrong is an incredibly wrong, then they should be held at the same level, which I'm not going to tell you what I believe that is. Maybe punishment, yeah, but maybe not. Maybe punishment. It's not really for me to say what the judicial system should look like. But as a doctor of the arts, I'm going to say all the things in this movie, Birth of the Nation, though they didn't happen in the order they said they did in the movie, probably have happened in reality. Does that excuse us to doing it again? Probably not. Does that mean the South won the Civil War? Absolutely not. And does it mean the North came in to police the South and then eventually to bankrupt the South in order to have all the money and then put them under their wing? Yes, except state sovereignties made that go different ways, because then all the states ruled themselves. They say there was one state that actually had legalized slavery for another couple of months, and then it too was put out. So what really good does that do? But here's what I want to know. When they first agreed that they could have slaves, with the North and the South all agreeing with the 13 states, what was it that later changed their mind? Was it they got so many and now they wanted to take over the money that came from it and just leave them in despondence or death? And I argue these devil's advocate points from the South because everybody's always saying, well, they went to go stomp the racism in the North. And I'm sitting there going, there's a lot more than that. They basically took out their vein of economy because they wanted to control over them. And then they went all state sovereignty, particularly around the time that Abraham Lincoln got killed, because the state as a liability didn't have enough to cover that. And so it had to go to a federal balance to pay back for Abraham Lincoln being shot. And these are not just conspiracy theories. I swear I got some of them from Oliver Stone's History of Cinema. And although he's have found ways to deconstruct conspiracies almost all the way down to nothing, there isn't really a conspiracy with Birth of a Nation. And let your hearts be easy on this. The movie itself, he resorted to both ways of kind of saying, yes, it was meant to bring the Klan along, especially in the 30s when he tried to re-release it, which was weird because that was later in time. But then he was like, no, this was, in earlier interviews, he was like, no, this wasn't racist. This wasn't meant to bring the Klan back. It's just what happened in the Civil War. He's saying, it's just what happened. I'm not trying to say I believe the politics of it. There's your typical director who's like, well, I'm political by showing the political thing, but that may not be what I'm political about personally, bro. That film man had a totally different personal political perspective entirely. And so we see that it's almost impossible to see really as an old film, if it is unethical, to support the movie without supporting the consequences it had back in the day. And here we were at the beginning of the class saying we're probably going to have to get rid of this movie, blah, 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 in society. Maybe we will. But I found a pretty solvent resolve here is that, like, well, they were racist once, and maybe they're still racist now, but I'm not, like, associating any position that's going to, like, turn into another civil war. Like, I don't think I personally, by teaching the Civil War, does that really make the Civil War come back? And I don't really think so. I mean, hey, I've got connected friends, and they would think I was totally out of my mind to try and say, let's bring back the Civil War. The economy wasn't the same way. They didn't want the blacks dead. They wanted them to run the fields. They didn't, like, the perspective was all off. And then you get the African Americans being in a foreign country, not knowing where they are, and being surrounded by this weird, like, utopia built before them, and then they have to finish it, and they're not sure what the hell is going on, probably, right, in a lot of these. And then they'll start getting beat, so then when they report to the North that they're beating them down, the North ensues, like, the real flight of the Valkyries, right? And, like, that's how it really happened, so that the movie didn't happen the same way doesn't really bother me. Because even though they're trying to revisionize history, they do that all the time with movies nowadays, like when Tarantino revises the ending of Inglourious Basterds and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. And those are endings that are taken to be the more captive or truer version because they're more aesthetic, which I love that theory. If it's more artistic of a version, then it should be the version shown. When legend becomes fact, print to legend, but in this case, if it's more aesthetic, when the event is shown aesthetically, then the event should be shown other than the event actually being shown just as an actuality, which is like a train coming into a station filmmaking we just can't relate to as much as maybe Griffith still had in the back of his mind from being alive during the invention of cinema, pretty much. And he was, 1909, which is 10 years after it's invented, he was already, like, in his 20s, going to do stunt work on this movie about an eagle that flies over a nest. So, now that we've had so much to talk about, I only came to defend the Klan because it seemed like they're so indefensible, but there are actually ways we can see kind of what Griffith was thinking, that racism doesn't make sense to me, not really a racist. That classism I can understand sometimes because sometimes people from the up don't want to see the people on the down and vice versa, But I need to stop that too because you have to be like a left-wing classist, not non-classist in like philosophy school. And I agree with that, but that the philosophy of Birth of a Nation is outdated, I can see that I can't see where racism comes from. I don't really know why certain things happened the way they did in history. I should spend more time on the ontology of humanity. Bertrand Russell, the philosopher, says a lot of that slavery mentality that was Mandingo and came from the Gabulan order of like the original, where the original Nazi people were. Anti-Semitism was a part of it, and hey, that's where I kind of draw the line, because some of my favorite Jews make some of my favorite movies, man. I don't really like anti-Semitism because Jews make good movies too, man. And Jews have been establishing Griffith all his life. I don't think an anti-Semite will want to see this thinking, so that's how they treat slaves. And they wanted to make us slaves. Now I'm a little upset about it. I don't know. You don't want to offend someone saying that you're going to enslave their whole race. And I don't know. It just seems offensive, but that certain things do create a certain hegemony of being slavery mode. Hegemony can be slavery. Let me explain. If something is overly represented in school and is represented to you quite a few times, and you're thinking that's the way it should be, maybe I've seen this movie so many times that that's the way it should be, or you're still not countering the argument that that's the way it should be, that it should just go on like that, then the philosophical effort to see how your reservations are towards the ethical move are, because if it's more ethical to be a non-racist, which it appears to, because like putting one race person down or putting someone below you is already unethical when it doesn't have to be done. If it doesn't have to be done to put someone below you, then you probably shouldn't. And if you're trying to base it on biology, that's a big mistake, because black, white, we're all, the genes aren't very, the genetics aren't very different, actually. And that whole speech that DiCaprio gives about the skull thing was a fake speech that we're all supposed to think, oh my gosh, is this real? It's like, come on, no, that was made up. But that was this famous speech that a lot of Southerners were making about why they had why black people weren't as smart as white. They probably didn't seem as smart because they were in a brand new culture and they'd just been stolen out of theirs. It doesn't take very much time for someone to adapt to their own language, let alone a language of someone else's, to teach their kids that language in a place where they were taken captivity. So you can see the downside of being African American in this era, but you cannot really look at the film and say, well, they lynched someone that was definitely guilty because they saw him chase that girl off a cliff, okay? So now I'm sitting here going, well, ethically, you want to test ethics. They had to hang the dude, but that they went on being a group of hangmen makes you think that if they were hanging so many people, as the news was saying when they came out with Birth of a Nation and were about to reintroduce it to the sound era, they had said that there were all these lynchings, and I thought there were probably lynchings in between and before. And not only that, but I can literally justify that this film may be the film of that type of rationale, the Nazi rationale, the triumph of the will naturale. But Griffith fighting in the war is a different esteem of social realism, that whether society likes it or not, or the right-wing Hegelians have deemed it to go into this utopia of love and money at the end of the movie, where they're sitting staring off at Camelot, and then the girl and the girl from the south, Lillian Gish, and the guy from the north, or the Stoneman from the north, and is it Stoneman from the south? No, Stoneman from the north. And they're sitting there watching the new utopia open for them. And in a way, this is what movies have at the center of their metaphor now. Race, class, and you name it, gender, the woman too. That the woman got a little more of an active role in anything in Birth of the Nation. We should actually enjoy watching the women in that movie get their own kind of theatrical roles, because it'd been a long time in the history of movies and theater and everything that a woman could so flourish her acting skills is with, say, a film of D.W.Griffith, that Lillian Gish did hang on to the idea that she could get more out of acting with him than anyone, but that she had a Southern notion, it wasn't unfamiliar to some of the early movie stars, that the South should win, was also kind of her influence when the script kept changing and they were wondering which way they were going to go. When they were in the middle of the script, the Schickel says they were going to have the North win, they were going to have the South win. Now they don't show anybody's win, but they do show the South surrendering. So they do actually show the South lose. So then for you to say, well, this is just recreational narrative, and the South didn't really lose because I saw in the other movies, like, maybe in Das Boot the Germans win. And I'm like, well, Das Boot's a freaking great movie, okay? It's a great movie. And they do show the Germans lose, but then they sort of pick back up their army economy and pick it back up and get ready in case it ever happens again, because this time they're going to rebuild fast enough that they can get their whole society back before it all goes somewhere else again, And so we look back at history and we're saying these big juggernauts of history's time would have probably happened anyway, whether it was because of the movies or not. Now, there's a Movie Made America book by Robert Sklar that's from UCLA that I'm not going to deny anything from UCLA. I love UCLA. Have UCLA credentials, PhD at UCLA in video and film. And Robert Sklar says that actually a lot of the things are divisive action, like they'll happen almost at the same time. Like you'll be writing about it and the things going on at the same time, unless it's a book about the past. But if it's about the present, it usually has enough elements of the present in the story to be like, well, this movie is coming out and these things are happening like it. Now, we know in the case of of some of the movies of Kubrick, they came out, people liked them so much they were dressing up and doing those things, they had to be banned by Kubrick himself. But we also know he did like Spartacus, which had kind of this wretched, violent streak to it. And then we look back on that today and we're like, yeah, but our version of Spartacus, you can cut off like people's heads and they'll walk around and chase you. You'll still be okay, And I'm not saying that like that's because you get more violence on cable TV, and that has something to do with it because you pay more for the lurid matter that you can't see on regular TV, and that proves that regular TV shows to kids pretty much all the time. Or at least there's someone in front of the TV that's not going to be allowed to watch the Spartacus movies, and that goes into censorship and everything. And they fought censorship pretty good with Birth of a Nation, but what was with him turning in the final copy to Woodrow Wilson and seeing if he could make a better version? That's like turning it into Thomas Edison or something. That's like saying, well, we spent all this time to create Hollywood to get away with that from Edison. Well, he was executing elephants in his film, and we made this pact in Hollywood never to really show anyone or any animal getting hurt, so that's the only good thing to come out of this film. And then you get to the movie, and it's like, now we're going to go, okay, hi, government, welcome back. We need some money for the movie. We didn't finish. You want to finish it with your own money? And we'll just turn it in any way you tell it to. So Griffith's like editing anyway. He's like, I can edit the government's out. But like between his editing and opening day and all that, everything got like thrown back into one more edit all the way through concerning Griffith getting in there with a pair of tweezers and like a big old magnifying glass, and he's like, this will teach all how to edit the great film. He's talking like Eric von Stroheim. And by then, we're pretty sure, as scholars on Griffith, that the government hacked it all to pieces, that they put twisted things in this part, and they put twisted things in that part, and Griffith had to go back and get that out, and there were still some relays of some of the things they put in that were offensive, really offensive. And if it didn't make the version you have now, and it's really offensive, the version we have now, that is what it made. If you did hear there was a more racist version, it wasn't Griffith's. But then again, if the government's wasn't Griffith's either, the film really, on weird circumstances, although he totally claimed it forever, didn't really belong to him or his studio because they had signed it over to the government. Now he's just got to stick by it was what he would intend, right? Or he's got to stick by what he would intend and then think, I wonder if they're going to really judge me if I gave it to the government. So now I'm going to re-edit it with sound, which got shut down, and not because he didn't employ the jazz singer guys. Like, you got to remember, the guy that directed the jazz singer wasn't that famous, except for in jazz clubs and things. And Griffith had tried to live the jazz club scene for all the early directors, and that they'd already seen Within Our Gates 4 years after Birth of a Nation, and that was how long he wanted Birth of a Nation to be out for. But Birth of a Nation And then he set this deal for the first African-American movie. So they must have known that it was all leading up to that. Those critics of Birth of a Nation saying, well, I still find it racist, didn't know it was all leading up to Oscar Micheaux and this black director and how he was going to get to direct black movies, and he'd make black movies that only black people get to see, and he's actually done that. And he's made all these early silent era movies that are like seedy and gothic and random and Pulp Fiction-esque with this whole early film noir movement, and Griffith, he's got his excuse me, Griffith, he's got this catastrophic way of looking at like a war. It looks so realistic in all of his battle scenes and all of his movies. Maybe even more realistic than Barry Lyndon or Saving Private Ryan. I mean, in Birth of a Nation, it's really like, even though he does some flip camera things that use the same area for both sides, they run this way, they film this way, they put the line here and then they run this way, and then they edit it together to make it look like they're running this way. I mean, they do that in Birth of a Nation. They do that with the time he runs up and puts the flag in the musket. But that war goes on like all the time, and it ends up in War's Pieces, where you see all these dead bodies strewn out through a field. And so now you're getting terrified, but like at least there was a family we could relate to in the early part of the movie, and it seemed like the old glory utopia days of the South, of course, right? Where nothing's going wrong and everything's just like Wizard of Oz farm. Like everybody's like, oh, we're cool, we got our ducks in a row. No, I mean, look, there's ducks in a row, they're farmer types, agrarians, they're all seeking out the adventure and what it is to live in the South. And then, and so then you get like the encroachment of slavery becoming a race issue. And here's something important. Griffith doesn't even really remember what race is, because remember, around 1915, there wasn't much use of the word race that way, although that's what was used to say what someone else was in a sophisticated way. Nobody even knew what racism was. So now they're sitting here going, we're not racists and we're supposed to trust them either way. Because the film does get seedily racism, and I'm not supporting the condemnation of the African American in any way. I don't really mind if there's groups that form that think they're like supreme, but if they take a political edge and start to put power to it that they're using militant power to, that could be fascist, and I'm not into that. So African Americans, you can all go free after this class and be free from it all. I'm not going to sit here and say like, I'm saying like, oh, well, African Americans nowadays spend their time feel like they're in prison all the time, or feel like because I can't speak for them. Somebody want to come out and say what they say about this movie, that's okay. And if they do a deranged report like D.W. Spooky does on how the whole Holocaust came from this movie or something, like it could be worth listening to it. If like other movies like the one with Nat Turner came out, and that'd be all cool, then we're all like, wow, another Griffith impression. And then we got to think, okay, we're coming in courts because 100 of his other movies, Intolerance and Broken Blossoms and Orphans of the Storm and Way Down East especially, and then like Avenging Conscience and Judith of Bethulia and Enoch Arden, his short film, and Musketeers of Pig Alley, his short film. And then you get the post-birth ones like Intolerance. We already talked about Broken Blossoms. And then there's True Heart Susie, our favorite one, because the French New Wave said that it was their favorite one, even though it was about a Southerner who got killed by a Northerner who got killed by a Southerner, and the Southerner goes back to marry his brother that he killed, ex-wife, because that's what the brother that's dying tells him to do, to take care of her. And so that's the whole kickoff of the plot, and then from there on, it's just like this romantic melodrama, and there's this romantic melodrama that kind of magnetizes these characters together, even though they're from like this very catastrophic, disruptive beginning, which will later phase into a film like Hiroshima Mon Amour, where it's like more about a Broken Blossoms thing, where an interracial couple, like one from Hiroshima, where the bomb dropped, and this is after the bomb dropped, just after, supposedly in the film Hiroshima Mon Amour, and the female living with still a Jew still being tormented by the Nazis, and then these guys get together, they have a relationship, and will their traumatic post-traumatic stress disorder really let them get together is what the movie's about. So see, then you got a really left-wing policy where it's like, well, everybody's included, and the little guy is supported, and we're basically commenting on what happens to those in the margins that are being pushed away, still by a force that I don't think Griffith created. I think there were directors already planning to say that they were coming out on top as the greatest race of all directors. I mean, in other countries too, even around the time of, it wasn't Birth of a Nation that got everyone so patriotically centered on their own country that they wanted to start shooting rockets at each other, right? The rockets' red glare was in this sermon that was given at, what was it, 1776, when the Revolutionary War happened. And then there's another Griffith movie, America. And it says in the subtitles in America, it says, a war like no other, a war like no time and place has ever seen, a war like no other. And so, making a movie like D.W.Griffith made, and most of the movies that he did actually make, created a war like no other. Thanks for taking the Masterclass this semester. We'll talk to you all later. Hopefully, if you hear me next time, I'll be saying the word Tarantino as many times as I say Griffith. So we got to keep track of how many times I say it, and our YouTube will pay him 5 cents a time I say it. So I'll try to use it thousands of times. That won't even catch him up to what I owe him for letting me do that class. All right, let's do this. Masterclass, thank you. Thank you all. Thank you to Dana Poland for being the star critic on this, for Drew Casper, for Allison Trope being extreme critics on this matter that introduced this all to me. The David Bordwell sessions are good. On Silent Terror, the ultimate independent John Wagner and independent archiving of knowledge on the silent film has been going on for over 100 years since the beginning of film criticism, so I appreciate all that. And I'd also like to thank Clickstein, Lorenzo, and some producers here locally that have helped me in so many ways. They helped me carry off this show, and really they're the ones who deserve the thanks and proceeds. And I just like the kickbacks YouTube gives me by giving me opportunities like YouTube Masterclass and Coursera. You guys are great. Sorry we ever had that disagreement back in the day. I didn't mean to think that you weren't going to work, but at first you didn't work, and then you worked. So Coursera does work. Just give it a chance. And then it's a really great company. They have this huge amount of classes they let you take all the way through, and they just make you turn in the final to them, or they can grade the final. And then, and that's where YouTube Masterclass urges them to do, so they can get people their credits, and you'll get 4 credits for this class. And that USC was where most of the teachers I just named was from. Calarts also has John Wagner. And John Wagner really helped with this project because he kept sending me details of information that were helpful to the project, even though it's one of the most heinous things to try and rummage through. The ones that are just accusing Griffith or not accusing him are always the off and on switch going. Those are the articles which you throw out, because usually it's somewhere in the middle with history that you want to be searching for, and so we remembered that. And that book we did for BFI, that was a big book. That took 10 years to write on D.W.Griffith and his history, and then owning the Schickel book is even a better book about the whole situation of Griffith, but the BFI book's about Birth of a Nation, which there are sources of material on. Most of it goes against my claim that it's not as infamously dangerous a film as you think it is. But it could endanger you in copying racial slurs, and we got to be careful with that, because we don't want that, because there are people of race in school, and really to desegregate at this time would go against John F. Kennedy's wishes, or like, I don't even think current presidents would want to have a society that was segregated again. They'd lose like this part of the Senate. And I'm not saying the Senate from this point of view, because we know that was a jacked up screen. But if that's the most savage thing that's going to happen, I feel a little better than letting my kids watch some movies, but that this one takes it as the kind of extremist kind of way to go into the idea of a nihilistic nihilism, or that it's not exactly existential, but that it's extinctionist. is not excusable, but that war is what a hero is. A hero is what war is not true, because a hero rises above it and learns to end the war. Hegel says that a hero, a soldier, can come to any turmoil that can be as black as gray, as black as day, and turn it upside down and return you to the month of May. And that was kind of a bad thing to say, but that's what Hegel said. He was trying to write poetry, he always was. All right. Thank you, everyone, for attending this semester. We'll see you for the 6 classes in between about myself, and they'll be talking about how I got to where I'm at and what I'm teaching and everything, and some classes and ideas from all my friends and everything who are all great. Thank you. Goodbye.